Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thomas Bols. I'm the Managing Director for DI for the European, Middle East and Africa region. I'm here with Sissi Pham. She's the founder and CEO of AESARA and the AESARA Foundation. AESARA is a consultancy, as far as I understand. They're providing digital solutions for pharmaceutical companies and other biotech partners. So I'm very happy to have you here. Sissi is also a member of the program committee. So she has been very much taking care of the value and access track of this global meeting that we're here today. But she's also chairing two sessions. One took already place this morning, and one will take place over the next coming days. The one that took place this morning was around FDA Payer communications and the guidance that the FDA has given. And the other that it will take place, I don't know exactly when, but over the next days, is really around the whole issue around access to orphan drugs for rare diseases and the challenges that brings with that category of drugs. So very happy to have you here with us. I have a couple of questions. Let's start with the session that you chaired this morning on the FDA payer communication. So maybe as an introduction, how did it go? What did you learn? And maybe also not everybody understands really what the FDA payer communication is about. Explain me also maybe what it is, given that FDA is not a payer. So.
Exactly. So first off, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. So the FDA payer guidance session this morning actually was to talk about the FDA payer guidance that was released in 2018. And that was 20 years in the waiting. And it was actually, when it first came out, it was a surprise to all of us actually, yes, because we've been waiting for 20 years. We didn't think it was ever going to come out. And when it finally did, it was a very exciting time for us because it actually gave us a lot more clarity in how we could proactively communicate with payers, right? And as we all know, with the rising healthcare cost, it's ever more important for payers to make the right informed decisions about access, right? And from an industry perspective, we have to help them think about, what's the value of the products, what's the affordability situation, right? And so to facilitate that conversation, the FDA actually had put a guidance together based on the Cures Act and the FDA Modernization Act of 1997, came out with the interpretation and guidance as to how industry could proactively communicate with payers. And so a lot of companies now have developed their internal guidance, how to operationalize this, so the field folks can proactively communicate with payers before launch, for example, about the recent clinical trials. So this way, payers actually can make advanced planning before the product actually is launched. They're not surprised, right? Okay. And then after launch, certainly the value proposition continues to grow, right? And so the pharma companies have to come back to the payers and help them understand what's the pull through of that. Did what you say pan out in the real world, yeah, right? Not just the clinical trial data.
Evidence almost, right?
Exactly.
And so, but you say it took 20 years to develop, and now it's 1 year in, let's say, in force or to be used. Is that 1 year? Does it give already enough time to make some conclusions? Like, has the communication improved or changed in this last year?
Well, certainly, I think from my perspective, having worked in industry when I was at Glaxo Wellcome and GSK, we actually came up with our own internal guidance, and when I've been consulting with other companies, have helped them with their own internal guidance. What I've seen is that there's actually a convergence, and it wasn't too far off, our internal compliance versus what the FDA was saying. And I think for the most part, people felt it was very pragmatic. Okay. And very supportive of that communication channel. So I think a lot of companies are doing more of it. There's still more room for more proactive communication, but we're figuring out our way. It's only been a year, right? Yeah. And so to your question about the session this morning, it was a fully packed room, I'm pleased to say. So it was a good session. Yeah.
Okay. And do you think, because of course we at DA always like to see not only convening people for these kind of debates, but also see, okay, what the outcomes, can we bring it to the next level, or can we have some outcomes from it? So you see, like, that's also a bit to my question before, like after a year having this communication out there to be used, did anything come up this morning, like how it needs to be improved or changed, or is it too early to say, like, let's see how it works first, and then maybe after 2 years or 5 years you need to revise it?
Interesting question, right? How do we know if it's working? I think one way is that there's been no notice of violation from the FDA, right? That we're doing it compliantly, so nobody's getting in trouble, if you will, so that's a good thing, right? And the other thing is that we need more time for the FDA to actually review, the activities over time, because when we actually promote on HCI under 502A, we actually have to submit a form to the FDA, Form 2253, that indicates this is for formulary decision making. And so the FDA is tracking all of this, right? So I think in probably a couple of years they can tell us, how, what's the volume, because they are tracking this.
Okay. Maybe as a last question on this subject is we talk a lot about FDA and sort of the industry, but since it's payer communication, what do the payers think? Or how are the payers involved in this triangle maybe?
Right, so actually the payers were very much a part of the conversation with the FDA, asking for this proactive communication, right? Because actually 20 years ago, the payers were working with other academics institutions to figure out how to get more information from industry early so that they can make informed decisions. And over time that has morphed into the AMCP evidence dossier, but that's only reactive, right? Only when the payers ask, can we send them any information, right? Because in the US we're very tightly regulated as to what we can and can't say, right? And so this new guidance is actually a win for industry, but also a win for payers, because now the channel of communication is open.
It's clear. Okay, good. Let's switch maybe a bit to the session that's coming up, right? The area of rare disease, orphan drugs, etc. So maybe as a sort of general question to kick it off, what's your expectation? Where will you be focusing on, or where do you think your panel will focus on? What do you expect from the session?
Right. I think the expectation for the session is to raise the awareness and understanding of rare diseases, right? We know that the cost of drugs are ever increasing, and especially in the rare disease area. So I think that the issue at hand for us is actually we've got to figure out how to communicate and figure out how to solve the cost for these rare treatments, right?
You mean the cost as in the price?
The price, right?
Yes.
But it's, these treatments, they're more and more rare. Treatments are going to come out in the next few years, right? And the costs, as we know with gene therapy, are enormous, right? We just had the Novartis product for $2.5 million, right? There are more of those, right? There are more of those to come. So we've got to figure out, how do we solve this? How do we pay for this in a responsible way so that patients still can access the treatment that they need, right? And so there's actually been a lot of work by some patient advocacy groups. They actually had a summit here in California, actually, last year to start the dialogue. So we're actually building on that work and inviting other people to the table and making sure that we are opening the channels of communication so that we all together can figure this out. This is not a drug industry problem, it's all of our problem, right? Sure.
But do you have sort of like, it's sort of probably almost literally the multi-million-dollar question or the answer. What's the answer to this? Because as I said, the evolution for orphan drugs and for rare diseases have been to sort of like, this was a challenging area where there was no innovation, and patient groups and others really were saying we need treatments for those diseases that are very, very specific and have small population, to a situation where, as I said, even if as a general reader of the newspaper, it seems to be every day a new drug comes out for a rare disease. So it's it staggers up, and that's one conclusion. And the other one, they all seem to become every day more expensive. You thought like 100 was the top yesterday, tomorrow it is 150. So where will we go, and what could be solutions and so on for this? I know it's a tough question, but in which direction do we at least have to think?
It's a big problem. It's a complex question. I'm not sure I have the answers or anybody has the answers, but I think what we need to do is actually come together, as physicians, providers, as health care policy folks, as people who run the healthcare systems, as people who develop policies, as well as people who come up with the innovative treatments to figure out how do we make the healthcare system sustainable. We have a role in making sure that this works for all of us, right? Nobody wins if patients can't get access to the drugs, right? So I think we need to solve this. Pricing the way we have done with traditional drugs is probably not the same model, right? So we need to figure out how do we do this and make sure that healthcare at the end of the day is sustainable.
Sure. Okay, maybe I switch a little bit of topic around, because it's a big theme also here in many sessions around transparency, right? Because but transparency, as I said, particularly here in the different session rooms, focuses very much on clinical trial data transparency, and that seems to be a big topic. Do you see any other areas where transparency is very important for maybe the main healthcare actors, so payers, regulators, patient groups, industry?
Yeah, so this is an interesting, segue from the last conversation, right? I think there's a lot more transparency, certainly on the patient side. We all, certainly on the U.S. side, don't quite understand how the healthcare system works, right? We're a very fragmented healthcare system, unlike, the European systems and others where it's a single healthcare system, right? A single payer healthcare system. So here it's very difficult for patients to navigate through the healthcare system. I know that, when my father was ill about 4 years ago and was diagnosed with lung cancer, that was my real first entree into figuring out how do we help my father, who does he need to see, right? What's the best care? How much is this going to cost? Who's going to pay, right? So we need to understand in the U.S. side, how do we navigate through the maze of the healthcare system that we have? Depending on your healthcare insurance company, you go down this path. If you're another healthcare insurer, you go down this path. But to the consumers, it's all very difficult, right? I work in the healthcare system, and I had a hard time navigating.
You're an expert,
right?
Yeah.
Supposedly, right? Yeah. And I had a hard time navigating through the system to ensure that my father had the best care possible. Yeah. It happened, but it was a lot of effort, right? It's so fragmented. So I think the healthcare system needs some transparency, and then also the other side is the cost of care, right? Oftentimes people focus on the cost of drugs, but I would ask, do we know how much a procedure costs, how much a hospital stay, and why does it cost as much as it does, right? So I think we need to understand a lot more, throughout the healthcare system.
Okay. Do you feel, maybe to bring it back to DI, do you feel we addressed that enough, sort of these kind of issues? Do you feel that you have been on the program committee? Is this an area that you think, no, it's really covered, or do you think like this? Because I think you raise very important issues, right? But my question as a DA employee is like, do we address them, or can we address them more or better, or in another way?
I think it's a complex problem that the U.S. healthcare system is so fragmented and complicated, right? So I'm not sure that DIA alone can solve, but certainly DIA can contribute to that. And I think there's more work to be done in making sure that we understand how the healthcare system works and what the cost of care is, and be able to translate that in a way that it's consumable for patients.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, maybe that's a good note to end upon. So thank you very much for your time, and of course, above all, for your input in the program committee and running 2 sessions over the next couple of days. So thank you again, and hope you enjoy it.
I will. It's been my pleasure.